Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Baltimore-Washington Conference's Everyone Counts webinar series with our focus tonight on economic justice with Delegate Wanika Fisher and Andrea Johnson. We're so glad that you're here with us tonight. We invite you to invite others to join us at Everyone Counts and Baltimore-Washington Conference, bwcumc.org/everyone counts. Please make sure you register, come back and look at the webinar after this time, and make sure you share with other individuals the information that you've learned here tonight. I am Reverend Dr. Stacy Cole Wilson, the Executive Minister of Justice and Service for the Baltimore-Washington Conference. This is a part of a series where our social action teams share practical ways how you can be involved in attaining the justice that we all seek. Just want you to pay attention to all of the buttons that are available to you. There's a question and answer section where you can share with us any questions you may have throughout the webinar. You'll also see a place where you can chat if there's some items that you may need or you're unable to hear us. We invite you to just please place your comments in the chat, and you're also welcome to offer feedback. We're so glad to have with us here tonight Delegate Fisher, welcome, and Andrea Johnson, welcome. Our moderator for our discussion tonight is Reverend Rochelle Andrews, and we're so glad that she'll be here leading us tonight. Just want to introduce you to the committee, the individuals who work behind the scenes to help for the entire Everyone Counts webinar series. These are the individuals before you: Reverend Dr. Sonia King, Reverend Dr. Giovanni Arroyo, Ann Price, Jan Taylor, Reverend Rochelle Andrews, myself, and Andrea Johnson. At this time, I invite Reverend Rochelle Andrews to lead us in prayer.
Good evening, everybody. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for gathering us here together. We are grateful that you have brought us the opportunities to learn from one another. We are thankful that we have the opportunities to be able to be the hands and feet of Jesus in our world. And now we ask you to help us as we hear these words. Let us then leave here and go out and be doers. We are thankful for leadership. We are thankful for the people. We're thankful for lay and clergy. We're thankful for all these people and for our leaders, even in our government officials. We thank them for being here to be people to help us to do the work that is needed. For this, we are grateful. Amen. Well, good evening, everybody. I am excited to have you here with us for our economic justice webinar on Everybody Counts. Just to give you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight. This webinar will focus on the economic impact of COVID-19, and specifically we'll be lifting up the fact that women, people of color, and immigrants are on the front lines of this crisis, both as a large percentage of those providing essential services and as a large percentage of those people being impacted by the job losses, struggling to work, find care, and things like that. We will focus on how these jobs are now being treated as essential, but the workers in the jobs are being treated as being expendable, and how racism and sexism and the devaluing of Black and brown women in particular are at the root of that. We'll talk about how women, people of color, and immigrants are being left behind in the federal COVID relief response, how we need to center women and people of color in the relief response, and what specific public policies are needed so that we can all work together with safety, dignity, and respect. So this includes things like the PPEs that are needed, strong health and safety standards, unemployment income for those who quit because they can't go to work because it's unsafe for them or their children. And so these are all things that are affecting, even getting food each day, things that are affecting, whether it be drive up or walk up to get food when foods are given away. These are things that we don't always think through when we plan about helping in this crisis. And so we're excited to have Delegate Wanika Fisher here with us tonight, and also Andrea Johnson. And so before we get started and I turn it over to Andrea, I'm going to give you a quick bio on our two panelists. Delegate Wanika Fisher is a proud daughter of immigrant parents. She is a lawyer, community advocate, and coalition builder. Wanika represents the residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, District 47B, and serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Wanika Fisher serves as the Assistant Majority Leaders in the House of Delegate. She graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park, with a BA in Government and Politics and African American Studies. She then received her law degree from Pennsylvania State University, Dickinson School of Law. Wanika has a breadth of experiences on the county and state level before seeking elected office. As a staffer on the county council, Wanika helped protect senior citizens' leases and ban coal tar from Prince George's County. While working in the state Senate, Wanika worked on the Justice Reinvestment Act, helping reform the criminal justice system and protect immigrants. As an assistant state's attorney, she spent each day targeting serious crimes while providing nonviolent offenders with paths to rehabilitation. Currently, outside the legislature, Wanika represents clients in criminal and civil proceedings. She is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and is a very active member of the Iota Gamma Omega chapter of Prince George's County. Wanika continues to serve her academic institutions by serving on both the Penn State Law Alumni Society Board and University of Maryland Alumni Association's Board of Governors. Wanika is an active member of her congregation at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Hyattsville and a major fan of Maryland Terps football and basketball. Welcome, Delegate Fisher. As a Rutgers alum, I will not hold that Terp thing against you. God bless you.
Thank you.
And Andrea Johnson. Now, I asked Andrea, I'm gonna tell you all now, I asked her for a mini bio, and apparently she took the mini to heart.
Did we lose Reverend Andrews? Oh. Oh, Reverend Andrews, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Where's the last person you heard me?
My bio is mini.
Oh, it is Minnie. In that role, she works for the Workplace Justice and Cross-Cutting Initiatives at the National Women's Law Center. In that role, she coordinates efforts to advance the state policies across NWLC's workplace justice, income security, education, and reproductive rights and health teams, while working directly on legislation and litigation related to pay discrimination, sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, and unfair scheduling practices. And so now I turn it over to Andrea and Delegate Fisher.
Thank you so much, Reverend Andrews. And I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I can figure this out. Let's see. Are we in business? Okay, awesome. So good evening, everybody. As Reverend Andrews said, I'm Andrea Johnson. I'm Director of State Policy with the National Women's Law Center in DC, and also a member of Foundry United Methodist Church, which is just down the street from the Law Center in DC, which is pre-COVID times, is convenient. And I'm also chair of the Baltimore-Washington Conference Gender Equity Advocacy and Action Team. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the National Women's Law Center, let's see if I can advance this, here we go. We're a legal nonprofit that has been fighting for gender justice for over 45 years, and we fight in the courts, in public policy, and in our society. And as Director of State Policy, I have the privilege to work with a lot of delegates in Maryland and Annapolis, and there are a lot of exciting advances we're seeing at the state level. We work to remove the barriers to equal treatment for women in the workplace, especially women facing multiple forms of discrimination, including women of color, LGBTQIA people, and those working in low-wage jobs. I'm really honored to be here with you all today in my sort of dual role with the conference and then the National Women's Law Center, and to be in conversation with Delegate Fisher to really talk about how the racial and gender impact of COVID-19 and the economic crisis and what we need to do to rebuild a just economy. And with the racial justice protests rising up across the country this summer, we've been reminded that we're not just fighting off one pandemic, but two: COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of white supremacy. As we have mourned the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more, we've also mourned the Black families who are disproportionately dying from COVID-19, and the fact that Black and brown people, especially women, are disproportionately losing their jobs or working on the front lines of this crisis in inhumane and unsafe conditions. And as the Law Center's president, Fatima Goss-Graves, has said, the systems that got us here are not broken. They're doing exactly what they are set up to do. These deaths and the devastating toll that COVID-19 is taking on Black and brown communities are a tragic consequence of white supremacy. So I just wanted to kind of start out by naming that, because I think it helps us dive into what it is we actually need to fix and work on. To help us situate us in what we mean when we say that COVID-19 is having a racial and gender impact, I'm going to quickly lay out a few data points before turning it over to Delegate Fisher to discuss what the COVID-19 economic crisis is looking like in our communities and what we need to do to rebuild. We know that women are really predominate in essential jobs that are powering the country during this crisis. For example, women are 75% of people who work in hospitals, 93% of childcare workers, and 66% of cashiers and retail salespeople in grocery stores. And women of color make up a large percent of many of these frontline jobs. For example, Black women make up 6.3% of the workforce overall, but 11% of frontline workforce. In other words, more than 1 in 3 Black women is on the front lines, risking their lives to provide healthcare, childcare, and other essential services. And women, especially women of color, are also on the front lines of this crisis because they are disproportionately represented in the industries that are shedding jobs as a result of the public health crisis. Industries like restaurant, retail, and hotels. Women are 70% of wait staff and 66% of hotel, motel, and resort desk clerks. And again, women of color are overrepresented in all of these jobs, as are women who are undocumented. They are also very much overrepresented in the frontline categories, yet are still being left out of the key relief provisions that Congress has passed so far. We also know that, this is just research from a few days ago, women are still seeing double-digit unemployment numbers, something that we have not seen since the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually started reporting data by gender back in 1948. We have not seen these double-digit numbers till now. Black women and Latinas really saw particularly high unemployment rates at 13.5 and 14% compared to 8.3% for white men. What's important to note is that there have been some job gains in the last month, 2 months. A lot of these job gains were in retail or the leisure and hospitality industry. So these are jobs that will likely be the first to go when businesses shut down again as things spike. And as Reverend Andrew said, as these frontline jobs are being recognized for how essential they are to COVID relief and to our economy, but the people who are working in them, mostly women of color, are being treated as expendable. And due to systemic racism and sexism, many of these frontline jobs are low paid, incredibly low paid. And they don't offer basic protections like paid sick days, employer-sponsored healthcare, or adequate health and safety measures. So those who are who have been working through the crisis or are being called back now are being forced to choose between their and their family's health and making ends meet, impossible decisions. And those who are being laid off, many of whom are breadwinners, have little of any cushion to fall back on. And that is in part because all of this economic pain is really being exacerbated by large racial and gender wage gaps that shortchange women, and especially women of color, hundreds of dollars per month compared to their male counterparts. And that leaves women with, again, even less of a cushion to fall back on. And as you can see from this slide, Black women, for example, in frontline occupations are paid thousands of dollars less per year than their white male counterparts. And one last thing I want to end on is that this pain really is extending beyond the workplace and into our personal lives. We are just starting to recognize that we have a major childcare crisis on our hands. Throughout this pandemic, and even now more as businesses are starting to reopen and many schools and childcare providers remain closed or are sort of teetering on the brink of collapse, women, and especially women of color, who are often the primary caregivers and breadwinners in their families, have been put in this really impossible position of choosing between a job and navigating a shortage of childcare options to care for their families. And that means a lot of women have had to cut back in their hours or step out of the workforce, or in some cases they're being pushed out of the workforce by employers discriminating against them for their caregiving responsibilities. And all of this is just really magnifying and further entrenching gender and racial income and wealth gaps. So in short, takeaway from this presentation and this data crunching is that women of color are really bearing the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis. And unfortunately, at the federal level, at least, we are seeing that women and women of color are really not being centered in the response. They are being left out and left behind in the COVID recovery efforts. So with that, I want to turn it over to Delegate Fisher to kind of be in conversation about what we're seeing, the lived realities, this is the data, what are the lived realities in our communities, and how we can and must center racial and gender justice in our COVID response. And excited to hear what is happening in Maryland and what things you are pushing for at the state and federal level. But I thought maybe we could just start, Delegate Fisher, with you kind of helping us better understand what the economic impact of COVID-19 actually looks like in our communities. What are you seeing amongst your constituents in Maryland, and who are working in essential jobs, who are being laid off or being called back to work? What challenges are they facing?
Thank you, Andrea, for that. I think, you know, I actually represent, if you go on Maryland.gov, and you can go to like the Maryland COVID sort of hub website of resources, you can see the cases per zip code throughout the state. And 20783 is actually my home zip code where I live, and we have the worst COVID outbreak in the entire state. So I really see the outcome of this every day when I go out in my community all the time. And I think the one word that I would want people to take away from this conversation and call, and I want to thank you all for putting this together and have a chance to say that, is the word intersectionality. You know, I think for women of color, whether we're talking about someone Latina, Afro-Latina, Black, Asian, women of color have to deal with the intersectionality of race and gender. And that can just be, it just is a double whammy economically on a regular day, and then add COVID-19 on top of it, and it's just exacerbated. And I know for my community, the biggest things I see is our frontline workers, our majority women that are in our stores that are helping us feed our families, and they're not really getting the relief that they need when it comes to whether it's breaks, hazard pay increase, things that we've been advocating for as they're doing this work. I, you know, stand shoulder to shoulder with a lot of the unions. UFCW 400 in Prince George's County represents a lot of grocery store workers and things of that nature. A bill that I worked on last session, which passed and is now law, is increasing the amount of notice a grocery store has to give employees when they're leaving or relocating. I think you probably heard before COVID, a lot of the Shoppers stores in our community were going out of business and leaving these women and a lot of people out of jobs and awareness of what's to come to prepare for their economic strain. And the ironic thing is that none of us can really feed our families and have the healthcare services we all need without these women on the front lines risking their lives. I also think that housing and childcare is probably the biggest thing that is pressuring and tucking at our community. In my district, we are in intense populated, high density population corner of Prince George's County. We're bordering DC. And the thing with this pandemic is that when you have someone who is working on the front line, maybe they're bringing COVID-19 home, they're not just affecting their immediate family, they're probably living in a situation with multiple generations of family, different families living together to afford the cost of living in this area. And so that means the virus is spreading amongst more people. And I really think that on the state level and here in the county locally, there has been efforts pushed by Casa de Maryland and other organizations to actually provide housing for frontline workers when they are found to be COVID-19 positive, so that they're not going home and affecting their entire family or whoever else they live with. So I think that the issues that you laid out, Andrea, are in reality here every day, and we're seeing it also amongst children of women of color. I think when we talk about the intersectionality that they face, a lot of women of color are not only, people say the primary breadwinner, they're also the primary love giver, they're the primary education giver, they're the primary dinner maker, they're doing everything. And I think for me, what I see in my community is that women of color are exhausted, and especially with us wanting to stay safe, which I agree with, and not having school in our community be in person. In Prince George's County will be virtual up until January. I think January they will calculate what they can do for the public school system. That means that childcare costs for the regular school day and children having access to that school day and having adults there to help them be focused we're going to see a huge, I think, educational gap with that. Our school system has done a great job in giving every child Chromebooks and working with Comcast, Xfinity, and others to make sure that the Wi-Fi is available for low-income families. But I mean, I'm not a parent yet, but I have a 7-year-old nephew and a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old turning 4 and 7. And man, you definitely need to be with them to get them to concentrate. So it's not just about having the Chromebook and the Wi-Fi, it's having an adult or even an older teen, to help focus really young children. And so I think all of those combined are such major issues I know we'll unpack, but also just the thing that worries me is the stress mentally and physically on these frontline workers. So it's not bad enough that they are having to deal with pay that they don't deserve, the issues around COVID-19. But anytime, I'm not a doctor, but I do read the studies and things like that. When you enter a situation with high stress, you're more susceptible to anything else. And so that's a lot of stress when you're combining all of those things on people's shoulders. So those are the things that I see and that really concern me in my community.
Thank you very much for that. So a lot of what you said kind of led into my next question of really digging in deep to what Black and Brown and immigrant women in particular are experiencing. So maybe we can start to focus a bit on the solutions. And I'd be curious what you see as what would a COVID relief response that really centers women of color look like?
I think it's going to take action on the state and the county level, because for the state, that's going to impact everyone in Maryland, right? So I think on the state level, we need to help demand and work with our union brothers and sisters to make sure that workers are being relieved financially and getting the relief that they need for being at risk, such as ideas like hazard pay, like an increased amount of money that you get because it's not just your regular minimum wage job, it's the hazard that you're taking on doing that. I also think that on a state level, we need to, childcare costs in general is extremely expensive. And now childcare costs amongst with COVID and the added risk is something that I think the state legislature really needs to look at, especially for frontline workers in healthcare and in cashier and grocery stores and things like that. I know that some private entities have already begun to do that on their own, which is great, but I think the state definitely needs to have a requirement when it comes to that. I think locally and a bit state with the housing, but housing comes interplays with the county a lot with zoning and what the county is willing to do. Usually the state can offer you like a sweetener, like, they're going to pay for half of it if the county wants to do something with it. I think we really have to look at what kind of view of affordable housing we have for our residents, because now the house is not just your house, it's everything, right? And so I think a lot of these same families that were used to living maybe two families in a certain kind of unit won't be able to manage that much longer, having so many people in an enclosed space because of housing affordability for safety for them. And I think Dr. Goldson, who's head of our school board in Prince George County, I know a lot of superintendents are looking at how are they going to integrate teachers and with personal education time for students. They've provided headphones for students, especially our low income or have working parents to help them keep focused. But I definitely think that we're going to have to find some creative ways to help bring adult interaction in a safe way with kids whose parents are working full time and not able to be there with them while they're doing the instruction for younger kids and even sometimes older kids. And I think, whether it's something creative, I think that's going to be on the school board level. Like, an elementary school or community center, it's like students can get sectioned each day if they want to come for a 4-hour period that's like socially distanced to do work. You know what I mean? To get them out of the house and do something different. And I think that's not really state legislation. That would be like local school board initiatives, or what our school superintendent will do to look at that. So I think there's going to be a lot of different creative ways to interact with our student population. The reason why I bring that up is because a lot of women of color have children that are in these situations that they're looking to provide for. And so it's really important that their worries around housing and childcare costs are something that we can directly put some teeth around and find creative solutions that are going to help relieve these women.
Thank you for that. I'd be curious to hear if you're willing to kind of share about some of the hurdles you've been encountering as you are pushing for policy responses that really address your constituents and women of color in particular. Has there been pushback? Has the business community been on board, or other policymakers been hesitant?
Right. So for those of you that on this call that are in Maryland, we are a part-time legislature. So we only meet January through April. We adjourned early due to the COVID crisis. The last time the Maryland legislature adjourned early was in like 18 something, when Abe Lincoln was coming to arrest the legislature because we were about to vote to join the South or not vote to get rid of slavery, and he wanted to arrest the MGA. So they literally like ended early and left. So that shows you how rare that is. And right now we're not in session. Some people want to have a special session, some people don't. But right now there's no direct bills we can work on to pass to make things law, other than the governor using an executive order to do something. So I think the conversations are happening. The business community seems open to it, but they know we can't make them do anything yet. So the real pushback and the real issues are definitely going to come as January approaches and session approaches. I think, to me, the $15 minimum wage bill that we had passed last session didn't go far enough. And I think the same hurdles we face with that issue on minimum wage is going to be the same now, as the business community is going to say, well, we're being hit by COVID, but grocery stores are not. So I think that, what we're going to do for a frontline worker, a cashier at a grocery store and a cashier at, I literally haven't been to anything else. So I don't know, clothing retail, like just a clothing retail store, legislatively, I think those are going to be different tactics on what the risks are, because a clothing retail store is going to say, we're down in profits by 30%. How can you make us do this? But a grocery store is not down in profits by 30% at all. They're up, whatever it is. So I think having something that's malleable, and I think that's the other reason why we also have to be really focused on our county governments at this time. And it's not to push the ball, as people will say, you're just pushing the ball to the counties. But I would say that if you're going to put into statute something that's going to affect every type of cashier, let's say, there's all different businesses, and a lot of businesses that are going underwater right now who have cashiers. So the legislation has to be super, super specific for frontline workers in grocery store settings versus anything else. And I think the county can also help supplement in what they're going to require, with the permit or whatever you want to require on a county level. So I think that the pushback is definitely going to be there. There's always there when money's involved. And the reality is women of color have never, ever gotten their fair share of the pie. And so anytime you are advocating for that, the same institutional patriarchy, racism, things like that are entrenched in there. But I think that this time, more than ever, especially seeing the intersectionality between Black Lives Matter and the COVID-19 crisis, which is a lot in this topic, will help, I think, us push the envelope even further to get these women, and obviously some men as well, who are in these same situations or similar, the relief that they desperately need.
Actually, on that point about the intersectionality between this crisis and the Black Lives Matter movement, so we had initially had this webinar scheduled for June 3rd. was a few days after all the racial justice protests really started taking off, and we were scheduled to allow folks time to attend some of those protests. And so, but yeah, I'd love to hear kind of more about your thinking about the impact that Black Lives Matter and the protests rising up at the same time as it was becoming abundantly clear that Black and Brown communities were most severely impacted by COVID. None of this seems to be an accident in many ways. And curious about your thoughts about the connections between COVID and the protests and what impact the protests are having on our COVID response.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a very powerful impact. And when I think about, what happened to George Floyd, to me, and it can be to some people, it'll be controversial, but to me, that was a public lynching of a Black man, right? And we were used to seeing that. But I think seeing it in 2020 really shook the conscience of the nation. And it doesn't mean to say that it's been happening, but on video in that manner, so brutally, 8 minutes and 26 seconds of a knee on your neck kind of showed the noose that's been around people of color for a long time, and more especially Black people. And that's why I think words are really important. When you say people of color and you say Black people, that's two different things. And that's why it's not that people of color matter, it's Black Lives Matter. And the reason why I think that's so important is that Black is the same attachment to being a descendant of slavery, right? And so no matter what ethnic group you're in, the ability to enjoy the America we enjoy come from the back of the civil rights movement. So that whether you're Latino, whether you're Asian, whatever you are, blue, purple, or whatever, if you're not white, you wouldn't have anything without the civil rights movement to give you that access. And now everything that's systematic that comes from slavery and racism deeply affects Black people more than any other ethnic group. And people of color in general are affected. So if I'm Latino has African diaspora genetics and blood in their heritage. You may be a browner tone. So the fact that we endorse racism, we endorse colorism is going to put you in a negative light. Even though you're not Black, you're feeling you're feeling the outcome and the spillage over of slavery because you're of color. And that's the way to track people. And I think that this is showing that it's not just Black Lives Matter in the hands of police. Black healthcare workers matter, Black cashiers matter, Black politicians matter. I think it's just showing that we are the same and we're not being treated the same. And we've really never been treated the same in this country for a long, since our existence. And I always think, for me, I love this country, and I always think we're working to that more perfect union. We're working to that democracy, but it's slow and it's painful. And I think people are at a point, and our country's in a crossroads, that we have the technology, we have education, like we gotta get there, and we gotta get there faster. Because the pace that we've been doing is just not enough. And in the 21st century, it is just ridiculous, especially when you compare us on an international lens. So I think that with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think for healthcare, for women of color that are in the healthcare sector, cashiers at grocery stores, all the frontline workers that we're seeing, big one that I haven't mentioned, cleaning staff, sanitation staff that are coming into our schools and our community centers and all those places that are actually cleaning facilities. They matter. They don't just matter, they're absolutely vital to our survival. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement is helping highlight that these people are at the bottom of your totem pole and why, when they need to be valued to provide for their families, and this is wrong. And it's really sad that a public lynching, and I say it that way because that's what it is. I think people need to digest that, because for those other officers to just stand there and not say or do anything, and people are screaming at you to just get up off of him, that's a lynching to me. And for that, I think a lot of Americans feel the same way I do. And I think that's why you see this public outcry and this fire, because we all don't want to be in a lie. You know what I mean? We don't want America to be a lie, that we're the land of equality and dreams and that everyone's equal under the law. But we all have the reality that we feel so much pain for George Floyd, for many Black women and Black men who have lost their lives to police, and people of color who've lost their lives to police. But we also don't want to live as liars, right? That's really, I think, as well, the reason why, you know, when I see my white brothers and sisters at these rallies and they're into it and they're reevaluating their own privilege and like, what does white privilege mean to me? How do I deal with it? Because it's like, who wants to live in something that's fake? You know, as much as it might not affect you every day, I can't hang up my skin color and just be something else, you know, but nobody, I think, wants to live in America that's a lie. We want to live in the truth of what we sing, what we say. And I think we all believed we were kind of getting there. And I think between this president, George Floyd's death, this pandemic, the amount of American lives that have been lost, period, under this president, I mean, we are so far away from the country that we say we are right now that we all are searching in our souls to find our way back. And that's, I know it's a little theory, but that's really how I view how they intersect and why all types of people, every color of the rainbow, is really feeling this moment.
Yeah, thank you for those powerful words and analysis of this moment. And yeah, I know I'm hopeful that it's kind of like reality has been laid bare. You cannot ignore it. You know, the reality of these inequities are just so obvious, and we can't have a way forward but to rebuild in a much more just way and equitable way. But I definitely am worried that I'm being overly hopeful and naive sometimes. So, but I guess maybe on that point, for those of us that, you know, are riding the hope to action, I know we have a few questions from folks on the webinar, so I want to just quickly ask this one last one to make sure we get it in. But what would you say to folks listening in today, in addition to marching and lending our voices to racial justice? What are other actions we can take to ensure that the needed racial and gender justice policies are implemented in response to COVID-19?
I would say that, and I know this is a big task, and it was funny, I was on another call complaining about the lack of advocacy work from our communities. It's really tough, but I think you need to follow your local electeds, not just President Trump. I mean, even local, like, do you know your US senator? Do you know your congressperson? Do you know your state senator? Do you know your state delegates? Do you know your county council member? Do you know your county executive? Do you know your central committee member? That sounds like a lot, but I'm really asking you to know 10 to 12 people. And I know a lot of us, some people on this call, we know the Real Housewives names. We know whatever the Kardashians are doing. I don't really know, but people know that stuff, right? People know people know what happened on the next episode of Greenleaf. You know, people know that. So you gotta know your politics. You gotta, and if you gotta make it fun for yourself, like politics is another reality show you're following, great. But you need to know that and know their names so that you keep them accountable. If you don't know who your local elected official is, there's no way to have me be accountable to your vote. And I think it's about interacting and letting that person know, like, straight up, I don't know if I'm going to vote for you again if you don't pass anything on criminal justice reform or Black Lives Matter or providing financial relief for frontline workers, right? And I think it's like, if the people don't keep, a democracy is a lot of hard work. And I think we need to be teaching our children, at least I remember when I was a kid, it wasn't really taught that way. It's like, democracy is this beautiful, cool thing, and we're a democracy. Democracy is painful, and it's a lot of hard work. And it's not just the elected officials, because if the public is not engaged, there's a reason why there are certain people that don't want to fund public education. Because an educated public, you have to actually present them real ideas. When the public's uneducated and doesn't know what's going on, you can do whatever you want. And that is like the biggest thing I would say, make this change that about yourself. Even if you're like, I don't like politics, I don't really want to be engaged, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter because it affects you anyway. It affects the air that you breathe, affects the water your children are drinking, affects everything. So the one thing I could say, and if for those that live in the state of Maryland, all you have to do, it's not a lot of hard work, you just have to find the right places. Go to mdelect.net. Type in your address, it's going to pull up all of your elected officials. It won't pull up your county council and your county executive. That you can either go find your old ballot on Board of Elections for that, or I'm happy to put myself out there if any of your callers or listeners want to email me, they're like, I can't find my county council member, I can't figure out the county things, I will help you do that and find it for you. Okay, so I will do that. And I think go to mdelect.net, put your address in, and follow every single one of them on Twitter, social media, whatever they're on. Because you know what's funny, when you send emails, you know, social media is changing. You know, constituents send me emails all the time. I answer, and I am a little bit of a younger, I'm the youngest Black woman in the MGA, so I'm a young millennial elected. But at the same time, my even older electeds are there doing their own Twitter. A lot of them don't have their own. You direct message a politician on Twitter, they're not that big, like, you know, Congress or US Senate. 90% of the time, it's them answering you. Versus email is very staffed. That's my inside thing to you all. Email is very staffed. I look at a lot of email, but you can literally DM someone. Now, they may not respond to you if they don't know how to use their direct message, but it's really them on their phone, like 90%. It's because we don't have huge staff, you know, we don't. So it's literally them. And I think you have to do that. And the one other thing I'd say is, don't just show up at the protest. Show up in Annapolis. For Montgomery County, show up in Rockville. Baltimore, show up at Baltimore City Hall. For Prince George, show up in Upper Marlboro and soon to be Largo. You have to show up, because the thing is, it's so easy to take votes when no one's looking. It's really hard to do it. And I know, you know, I was on another call and people push back on, we elect you guys to go do that. Especially like young progressives like myself. We elect you to do that. But I'm only one vote of 141. I'm voting the right way anyway. But it's hard for me to create pressure for my other colleagues to vote that way who don't represent you directly in your district if you don't show up. Because I need 71 votes. County council needs 5 votes, you know, to get it done. And so, like I said, I wish democracy was an easy pill. I wish you go there, vote for the right people, things are going to change. But as you can see, that's not true. Change takes every prong lining up. The right politicians in office, the right movement going on, the outside group pressure, the church community, teachers unions, you know, folks like that. All of that have to be happening at once for really great changes. It's not just one. And I wish it was easier. I wish we didn't all have to do that work. But every great movement in this country, child labor led by Mother Jones, civil rights, Martin Luther King, every one of them took painful work from nameless people. I think about Black women that were walking to work, painful, miles in the South for civil rights, to end segregation, for me to be where I am. And I don't know any of their names. And I wouldn't have this, I wouldn't be anything without them. And so it's gonna take all that nameless action to get us where we need to go. Because we're fighting a lot of something that's institutionalized, powerful, and has a lot of money. And it's gonna take that work. I wish it was easier, but it's not, and it's not going to be.
Thank you. I'm fired up now to go and just want to, totally underline, as my work at the National Women's Law Center is on state policy, just the massive amount of change you can make at the state level and how I feel like it's often overlooked. And that is just a big oversight. And yeah, a few voices can make a big difference. So excited to work with you all in Maryland. And I think Reverend Andrews is now going to bring up a few other questions.
Yes, we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one was, are you familiar with the United Way's Alice report? And I think that's to either one. And is it accurately portraying what costs of living are in various Maryland counties? And does that inform your policy and what you all are doing?
I'll just answer briefly. Yes, I'm very familiar. We're still working on the work group, but late Speaker Bush started an economic justice sort of work group after a lot of the furloughs on the federal level. And the Alice report, we had them present to us, and we used their reports to kind of analyze bills and things we want to go to. I think a lot of it is pretty accurate. Nothing's perfect. Sometimes when we compare like the Health and Human Services numbers from the counties with the Alice report, there can be disparities, but it was pretty accurate. And it was even interesting for me on that work group when I saw the cost of living in like places like Dorchester County, like rural Maryland, I'm not as familiar with. I didn't realize how expensive it was. Like, you know, like I'm thinking it's going to be something else. And the representatives, even though we're different parties, a lot of them are Republican, you know, they advocated, you know, people are struggling and this is what it is. So it was really, really helpful, especially on a state level. You know, I always say Maryland's tiny but mighty. We're a small state, but we are like so diverse. It still takes 2 to 3 hours to get, you know, anywhere pretty far from where you are. And so we're all facing a lot of different issues. So it was really helpful in seeing sort of other communities, and it almost helped, especially with minimum wage. It helped just like a lot of arguments were like, oh, well, those of us that live near the Delaware line, it's so you can work, it's their minimum wage is lower. So us doing that, we're not going to be able to compete. But when we could see like their housing cost is still comparable to something in a big 3 county, like a Baltimore, Prince George's, and Moco, it's like, okay, yes, you're near Delaware, doesn't have minimum wage, they stink, but the housing is still expensive. If you want to send your kid to the flagship university, University of Maryland, it still costs the same. Don't matter if you're from Dorchester or you're from Moco. It's still the same to educate your child at a Towson, at wherever. So it was really interesting in the policy discussion, and we definitely used it. I would say it was pretty accurate from my conversations, but I'm sure there's always areas to improve.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions, one on the chat and one in the question, and they're kind of the same because, as you know, probably an hour before we all got online, Joe Biden announced who was going to be the vice president nominee with him, Senator Kamala Harris. I have a number of reasons to be very excited about that announcement. And so one of the questions are, what do you think will be the impact of another visible national Black woman political leader? And the other part of that was another question, and asked that as well, as asking, what do you think, how you think this may be helpful in the fight for racial justice? And do you think there's a intersection there?
Oh, Andrea, you want me to go again? Andrea, okay.
Yes.
I'm excited about Kamala, y'all. I'm really excited. Not only is she my soror, I always say she's like my spirit animal because we are both half Indian, half Black. We are both former prosecutors, so I feel very connected to her, even though we've led totally different lives, but I still feel connected. I would say this, and I want this to be clear, because I want to say I love Kamala, right? I said that, and I do, and I'm a fan. I'm excited. That's my soror. I'm excited. And I'm excited for Joe, and I'm excited just to have competent people in the White House instead of incompetent and crazy. I gotta just keep it 100 with all of you. But I always say this: skin folk don't mean it's your kinfolk. Just because someone is Black or a woman or Asian doesn't mean they're gonna fight for your issues. Now, I believe that Kamala Harris will fight for those issues. She's done it in California. She has a track record of that. But again, politics is not easy. You can't expect her, if they win, she's vice president, she's going to make all these massive changes on racial justice by herself. She has to build a national coalition, create that pressure. What's great is that she's there to pull that lever. She's there to pull that lever and get it on the table, get on the agenda. But I think anyone would be miscommunicating the reality of politics if they said that we can all sit down and go home, Kamala's gonna be VP, we good, girl. That's not true. We still have to be as vigilant. So Kamala can sit there with Joe in the Oval and be like, see all those Black women outside? They're pissed. You gotta pass something. You see how many of them voted for you? Voted for us? You owe them. That's what she needs to be able to say. And without us, she can't say that. Without you all, I can't say that in Annapolis. I think that it's so important to be engaged. And I know I'm asking a tall order. I was saying, I was on a previous call, when I was talking to Andrea, and we were having pushback about these work groups, and I was saying that people need to show up, and we vote you to do that. That's true, but let me be honest with you, and I was honest on that call. White folks, white people, they show up for their issues. I'm not gonna lie to y'all. But when we're talking about like frontline workers, when we're talking about the mortality rate for Black women giving birth, doesn't matter what income, Black women are dying when we're having children, we need to fill the room just as much as they fill the room. And it is harder for us because we're working 3 jobs. It's hard to take off a day to come to Annapolis. It's hard to deal with things when you're maybe a single parent or you've got other stresses. We have a lot more going on. but we have to do the work for us, because no one else is going to do it for us. No matter how great an ally, no matter what it is, like, we have to show up. So that's what I would say. I think it's going to be great. I think I think this just shows whether you like Kamala or you're rooting for another woman. Joe Biden knows that it is time in the Democratic Party. Black women have been voting in the Democratic Party, doesn't matter what party you are on this call. I'm just saying facts. When you look at the strengths for the Democratic Party, Black women have been there voting. Whether you like the Democrats or you don't, it's okay. So for him politically, he needs to show that Black women definitely matter and Black women lead. Because they have, even if, again, doesn't matter what party you are, if you look at that Senate race, Senator Jones, in South Carolina, he won a Republican state with Black women votes. That when you look at the numbers. So the numbers game is, his choice reflects, I think, good leadership already, and I'm excited, but I'm not resting. So don't rest.
I think that is the best advice right there. Not excited. We're excited, but we're not resting. The work continues. Right. And so I love what you said about making sure that we get really involved. I will say that we have an intern at our church, and one of the first things we had her do was she was creating a spreadsheet of all of the political officials that are related to our zip code. And so that's kind of something to have as a worksheet. And it's something I would tend to challenge. I think you have challenged all of the people represented here as far as churches and people to know their politicians. When you say getting involved, can you just name a couple of ways? I know some, but maybe like whether it be phone or letters, like what are some ways that are really efficient? But you mentioned Twitter. We have a lot of our churches may have some older congregants. What are some ways that they can really be involved in the age of COVID, but still effectively help make policy changes?
Yeah, I think letters, emails, social media, having someone in your group, if you're organized, having someone request a meeting. I take more meetings now. Y'all, I'm working hard. I'm tired. I take more meetings now than I did in person, because before I had to be like travel time, actually, so I only had limited numbers of days. I have to say, for those that have the privilege for sure, the socioeconomic privilege to work from home, I mean, I'm literally working 8 to 8 every day, because it's like, there's no excuse to not schedule you now. I'm at home. I'm on Zoom. So I think having a few people, I would say, think about an issue you want to bring up, because the politician on the receiving end is going to take it seriously. They're going to look up what you're talking about before they come to you. They're not just going to come to you with an empty call saying, that sounds great, I'll look into it and let you know. You don't want to call like that. So there's a few of us, we're really worried about prescription drug costs. We're really worried about frontline workers and what they're getting and what relief you have in mind. Do you have 10 minutes to meet with a few of us to discuss the issue? You can do that, and I think you'll be surprised the kind of response you'll get from a local elected official, because they know if you're emailing for that, they definitely know you're voting. So they're definitely going to meet with you. So I would recommend those type of things, and participating in calls like this is such a great start.
Well, I think that's all of them. I think you covered a great amount. Thank you, Delegate Fisher. Thank you for the information. Thank you for reminding us of what we as the church can do. A lot of times people think as a church we just gonna pray, but you have reminded us that we have to pray with our feet and our hands and our social media. Thank you, Andrea, for the numbers. We were getting people commenting that those help them really see things in the numbers. Were a good visual to understand what, it's one thing to say essential workers are out there, or that, how immigrants and people of color are affected, but to see the numbers, it gave us a visual. And even as we go into economic justice and voting and stuff, it's interesting to note that here we are about to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women being able to vote. It's only been 100 years, y'all, 100 years. And so I guess it's a good way to be able to celebrate with Senator Harris running for vice president, but we know we still have a lot more work to do. Any last comments from Andrea or Delegate Fisher? Let me have a last closing from each one of you.
I guess one thing I wanted to say on the issue of Senator Harris and this being a historic moment, and your point, Delegate Fisher, about not resting. I think another way we need to make sure we don't rest, not only as relates to Senator Harris, but this whole crisis, is we just need to be hyper aware of the stereotypes and biases that we bring with us. And with this historic moment of Senator Harris being named the VP candidate, we're just very much on alert for how the media is going to be talking about her and how stereotypes are going to be weaponized against her as a Black woman. And I think, we all need to kind of play a role of checking folks and when they're evaluating candidates and bringing those biases to the table and checking the media and pushing back, whether it's through our own social media or writing an op-ed or whatever. And I think it kind of relates to COVID insofar as, to your point, Reverend Andrews, I think a lot of folks just kind of talked about issues without bringing race or gender or immigration status into it. And we need to be aware of who is actually being hurt, who is actually being impacted, and name that. And that's the only way we can actually really get out of this crisis. So naming the biases at play and the stereotypes and the structural racism and discrimination and sexism are so crucial to all the things. So very excited to have advocates like Delegate Fisher leading in that respect, and excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Andrea, to Reverend Andrews, as always, to the whole ministry, to Reverend Wilson as well, for having me, for being part of this conversation. My contact information was put in the chat. If any of you need me, I'm a phone call or email away. If you're having trouble, even if I know you all have a broad breadth of people, even if you're out of state and you're having trouble figuring out I have a lot of connections. I can definitely help you figure it out. I'm happy to do that. And I also want to say that, take time for self-care. It's a very hard time. I struggle. I think everyone does. I never want to come across like this coiffed. I did put on eyeliner for you guys, but I don't want to come across as this coiffed, elected official. Everything's easy breezy. I'm a millennial, a hashtag, it's tough. We're in really tough times. And I would say, forgive yourself first, right? We all ask for forgiveness in our own faith. And I think you have to forgive yourself for your shortcomings, for what you haven't done, for what you didn't know, for what you didn't do, and just know that you're going to do better the next day, and that you're going to find a different way to interact with your community and hold your community closer and be a part of the change. And just know that you are the leader you've been waiting for. I say that to myself all the time when I'm upset with happening what's in Annapolis. I can't get anyone to listen to me. I'm like this. I was like, I'm the leader I'm waiting for. And it's hard, and it's definitely a hard burden, but you are it for your family, for your community, and you just making those small changes a day. And the one thing I say, and I've been saying this everywhere I go, I said, a lot of this is overwhelming, especially if you're unpacking your privilege, maybe other things. A lot of this can be overwhelming. All I ask is put a timer on your phone for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was the time that murderer's knee was on George Floyd's neck. Take 8 minutes and 46 seconds to learn about a different culture, learn about what's going on in your community, who your elected official is, anything. If you just take 8 minutes and 46 seconds every day, from now to next year, you got it. You're going to be in. That's all it takes to make a change in yourself and change others, and to remember George Floyd.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Fisher. I will now turn it over to Reverend Stacy. Before I do, I wanted to also thank Delegate Fisher because the Affordable Housing Task Commission of the Baltimore-Washington Conference, Greater Washington District, had our grand opening, and Delegate Fisher came, and that also was part of how committed she is to economic justice in our area. And so we wanted to just shout that out as well. So now it's over to you, Reverend Dr. Stacy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Delegate Fisher. Thank you for the resources that you've shared, from how we can contact our elected officials to practical ways that we can show up as the church and faith leaders, as individuals who are concerned about our community. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing all the statistics that you've shared with us to keep us mindful of the ways in which we can stereotype others and the biases we may bring. Just want to simply say thank you all for being here with us tonight. Just want to offer a blessing and send us forth on our way. Gracious and merciful God, we thank you for your time. We thank you for being mindful of us. And we thank you for calling us forth as your children to go forth in your name and to uplift your cause, your agenda, your justice in the world. Help us to show up in the world that honors you, that honors your name, that honors your will, that honors your commandments, to love one another as you've loved us, and to first love you. We thank you for the thoughts that have been shared that glorify your name. And for those things, oh God, that we've shared that perhaps we need to continue to think on and ponder and discern how we're showing up and how we're advocating for just change. We invite you to continue the conversation with us. Thank you for being the one who is merciful. Thank you for being the one who is kind. And thank you for being the strength that lives within us, that goes before us, that hovers over us, and carries the collective cries of your children here and around the world. It is in your name we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you. Thank you.
Bye,
God bless
everybody.
you, Delegate. Bless you, Andrea. Bless you, Rochelle. Thank you for joining us tonight.